Of course, at Guantanamo, some 800 men and boys at any given time have been held since 2002, some of them, with, like animals in small cages, with no charges against them, and many of them tortured and abused. And of course, President Obama has said he would close Guantanamo, and it's high time, because that has become symbolic of U.S. hypocrisy.
I don't want to be ambiguous about this. We are going to close Guantanamo, and we are going to make sure that the procedures we set up are ones that abide by our Constitution. That is not only the right thing to do, but it actually has to be part of our broader national security strategy, because we will send a message to the world that we are serious about our values.
While President Obama looks like he will in fact close Guantanamo within the year, he has failed to address the release of the 600 prisoners held indefinitely at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Times writer Tim Reed said that the prisoners, many held without charges for years, are packed into conditions far worse than Guantanamo. Tina Foster, executive director of a legal advocacy group called the International Justice Network, points out that Obama has adopted the Bush administration policy which allows the president to maintain a completely lawless enclave any place in the world besides the U.S. and Guantanamo Bay. Obama is also expanding upon other Bush administration policies with regard to national security, including renditions and indefinite detentions of suspected enemy combatants.
So that any prolonged detention is carefully evaluated and justified. Our goal is to construct a legitimate legal framework for the remaining Guantanamo detainees that cannot be transferred. Our goal is not to avoid a legitimate legal framework. In our constitutional system, prolonged detention should not be the decision of any one man. If and when we determine that the United States must hold individuals to keep them from carrying out an act of war, we will do so within a system that involves judicial and congressional oversight. And so going forward, my administration will work with Congress to develop an appropriate legal regime so that our efforts are consistent with our values and our Constitution.
You'll construct a legal regime to make indefinite detention legal. You will, what does he say? Develop an appropriate legal regime. So you can construct a whole new system outside the courts, even outside the military commissions, so that you can indefinitely imprison people without charges. And you'll build that system from scratch.
Bush, actually before 9/11, although he used 9/11 as an excuse, but the evidence shows it happened before 9/11, set up a secret program to spy on communications, email and computer and telephone communications of U.S. citizens without a warrant. And this was illegal and has resulted in not just going after people who are considered to be terrorists, but also people who dissent against administration policies. And if you look at history, you can see that other administrations, too, have singled out people who question their policies, people who dissent, for surveillance.
In a controversial move during his campaign, Obama and his fellow Democrats declared their support for a sweeping intelligence surveillance law. The law would provide amnesty for telecommunication corporations that cooperated with the Bush administration's warrantless surveillance program. Since his inauguration, Obama's stance on defending the telecom companies has not changed.
The Constitution gives Congress the power to make the laws and requires that the President faithfully enforce them. The President does not have the right to rewrite any laws or even to pass laws. He did this with over 1,100 different laws, saying, I'm not going to enforce those laws that I don't agree with.
Although Obama has publicly denounced the use of executive signing statements as an abuse of power, he has continued the practice since becoming president, but he promises to use greater restraint than his predecessor in the future.
The House just passed President Bush's bill to redefine the treatment of detainees, and the Senate's expected to do the same thing tomorrow. Buried deep inside this legislation is a provision that will pardon President Bush and all the members of his administration of any possible crimes connected with the torture and mistreatment of detainees, dated all the way back to September 11, 2001. At least President Nixon had Gerald Ford to do his dirty work. President Bush is trying to pardon himself. Here's the deal. Under the War Crimes Act, violations of the Geneva Conventions are felonies, in some cases punishable by death. When the Supreme Court ruled the Geneva Conventions applied to al-Qaeda and Taliban detainees, President Bush and his boys were suddenly in big trouble. They've been working these prisoners over pretty good. In an effort to avoid possible prosecution, they're trying to cram this bill through Congress before the end of the week when Congress adjourns.
Since he talked to my friend Bunch in April, Mr. Obama's only lengthy comments about this were made to George Stephanopoulos on January 11th of this year. See if a disturbing theme becomes evident. Obviously, we're going to be looking at past practices, and I don't believe that anybody is above the law. On the other hand, I also have a belief that we need to look forward as opposed to looking backwards, later. My instinct is for us to focus on how do we make sure that moving forward we are doing the right thing. Later still, my orientation is going to be to move forward. Finally, what we have to focus on is getting things right in the future, as opposed to looking at what we got wrong in the past. Sadly, as commendable as the intention here might seem, this country has never succeeded in moving forward without first cleansing itself of its mistaken past. In point of fact, every effort to merely draw a line in the sand and declare the past dead has served only to keep the past alive.
Ignoring the last 8 years to focus on the future is not a viable option. As the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals have shown us, a crime is still a crime, no matter when it was committed. Now that we know that officials in the highest levels of our government committed felonies, the time to act is now. We must not rely on hope alone to restore our nation's credibility and dedication to the rule of law.